Good, Dan. Actually, you were recording. You just turned it off and turned it back on again, or somebody else was?
No, that was me.
That was Janet recording.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Here we go again. We're up to our average number of people. We might get a few more, but they're all welcome. And today we are going to explore inward. I don't know. Let me introduce Barry Johnson from the Chicago area, and he's going to introduce himself. Go for it. How's that for one of my briefer introductions? Barry, tell us who you are and what you're going to talk about, and then talk about it.
Very good. Thank you, Don. I've been calling about 15 years. I've been working in professional, I write software for a living, but I've been doing sort of ad hoc training and things, since I was 16 years old. And so it's been interesting to teach over and over again throughout the years, even as an amateur, and see how people react and respond. By the way, I should say, let's see, in terms of accomplishments, I've been we're members of the Illinois State Square Dance Hall of Fame. We were inducted in 2011, I guess. Member of the Color Lab Board of Governors, recent election there. So I'm happy to represent each of you in that group. We're also the business chairman for the 2024 National Convention that's going to be coming up in Milwaukee. A little bit of advertising on the shirt. That's actually we're looking forward to that convention. It's going to be a good one. It'll be in some ways a reprise of what we did, what many of the same people did in 2016 with the Des Moines Convention, and Nina and I were the business chairman for that as well. But let's move on to the topic. Today's topic is more focused not so much on teaching, but rather on how people learn. If you'll pardon me, I put together a brief slideshow. Dan, would you mind turning on my screen share? Or excuse me, I'm sorry, host disabled attendee screen share. Yes, I need to share my screen if I can.
There we go. Sorry about that. You are now,
right.
Everybody can now share, but you get there first.
Very good. Share and do one of these. Oh, I don't need a calculator. Come on, PowerPoint. Here we go. So the topic is more how people learn rather than how people teach. And more precisely, it's going to be how people remember what they have learned. It's not really about teaching. We're going to talk about the processes of memory formation, some of the biochemical things that happen, just a tiny bit. Talk about the way that people recall information, the brain physiology, cognitive science theories. This all sounds like terrible, horrible stuff, but we can tie it back very directly to our interactions with dancers, both as a caller and especially as a teacher. And so it turns out knowing something about these pieces may very well impact the way that you choose to teach things and the way that you think about how your students have been reacting. I'd like to introduce you briefly to my cousin, Tim Tully, who in 2002 was on the cover of Forbes magazine as a result of his research. Forbes did they put the address stickers in a very unfortunate position on the page. But Tim is an interesting guy, my cousin, the geneticist. He's been studying the physical processes of memory formation for, I guess, 46 years. 46, that's nearly 50. He's a leading researcher in the field. He actually is the chief, or has, until he retired last year, was the chief scientist of basically a research company. Leading research in the field, well-published, cited. We've had a chance to sit and talk about what he learned, and he turned some of this into layman's terms, and how that this applies to people. I remember Tim coming home from college when we would be down visiting, and he would bring along cases of fruit flies. They were studying memory formation in fruit flies, and he had to, in a like an 8-hour period, go through a whole bunch of fruit flies and sort them out by sex. Imagine catching a fruit fly, looking at it underneath a very large magnifying glass, and putting it this pile versus that pile so that he could do breeding with them. And so this type of research has been going on for a long time. What they found was that there are very specific genes in our chromosomes that affect the way that memories are formed, and that there's different sets of genes that affect different parts of memory formation. Some genes control the amount of short-term memory that you can have, how easy it is for you to make short-term memory, and to a certain extent, how long that lasts, whether it's a few seconds or whether it stretches out to, you know, a few minutes or 10 or 15 minutes. He also found genes that affect long-term memory formation, and they could do this through, they could breed fruit flies, and they already had proven that memory formation in fruit flies works the same way as it does in people. They could breed fruit flies that had excellent long-term memories. They could breed others that had a very difficult time forming long-term memories. And in fact, they found that there was a midterm memory that's more like 1 day worth of memory. And it's that midterm memory that's actually very vital to forming long-term memories. So as you learn things, that goes into your short-term memory, from there sits in midterm memory for about a day-ish, and then moves into long-term memory. And if you're missing any of those pieces, you don't get memory formation. Diving into it a little bit, they discovered that long-term memory is formed by repeated exposures, that you had to be exposed to something. In the case of fruit flies, it may have been an electrical shock and a bad odor. In the case of people, it might be reading or listening or hearing or dancing. But you're exposed to some sort of thing. Then you have to go away from that for a period of time, come back and be exposed again, and go away for a period of time and come back. The distance, the time between those exposures turns out to be very, very important in forming long-term memories. There's a technique called massed learning, or massed repetition, MASS, massed. And that's where if you take Bart Simpson on the Simpsons, in the opening things, writing on the board, 100 times or whatever. That's a massed type of repetition. You just do the same thing over and 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 over, one immediately after the other. That doesn't work as well as doing it, going away for a while, coming back, doing it, going away. The rests in between those repetitions are important. Now, going back to the genes, to the hereditary genes that Tim's team discovered, was they found genes that would affect the length that rest had to be. Certain mutations in the genes would take that rest period down very close to zero, that you could form long-term memories very quickly with only a brief rest in between. He found other genes that would stretch it out, make it, and some that would make it really long, that you'd expose it and you had to wait a long time before an exposure to make it done again. So the amount of time varies based on specific genetic things in people. That's an interesting thing. By the way, the crux of his research and what was leading them towards the Forbes magazine cover, genes basically cause proteins to be expressed, chemical proteins, and the proteins then affect the memory formation. proteins are basically molecules. We can deliver molecules through other ways, such as drugs. And so if you can find a gene that makes you better able to form long-term memories, then perhaps we can turn that into a chemical formula that you can take by injection or pill or whatever, and get the same thing to happen. It turns out they weren't able to find that magic drug that fixes memory, but there's still people digging into it. Anyway, so it's not really clear what intervals are best. There's been mixed reactions inside the science. In some cases, there have been studies that show if you do something like expose it, wait an hour, expose it again, then double the time, wait 2 hours, do another exposure, double the time, now you're waiting 4 hours, expose it again, wait 8 hours, expose again, that works best. There have been other studies that said, no, a constant spacing, expose something, expose something, expose something with time in between, even if the times are constant, they found that worked better. Okay, so conflicting things inside the studies. It's not really clear. However, the studies pretty much all agree, do it without any spacing does not work as well for long-term memory formation. Now, in these studies, as they work through it, they oftentimes talk about spacing measured in intervals of like days, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, not 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute. How does this apply to us? Well, first, different people have different genes. There are very specific biochemical reasons why some people learn faster than others. It's not necessarily motivation. It's not necessarily age. The younger folks do seem to do better than olders in long-term memory formation, but it's not just that. There are hereditary genetic differences between people that affect memory formation. So as you're working with students, don't be surprised when you see that difference between people. Another thing we can take away from this, if your thought is that you can teach something one night, and you work it hard all night long. We did, let's spin the top, and we must have done it 50 times this week. When they come back next week expecting them to remember spin the top, probably not going to be the case. Even though you did it, a huge number of times in that one day, that massed repetition over and over and over again, the people didn't get the rest in between exposures that they need for their brains to form the long-term memories. And so it's very few people that can actually learn something one week, dance it the next week without having doing something in between. Daily classes would be far better for us to learn. Even multiple class sessions in a day where you take a break in the middle. Biochemically, those are far better for forming memories. You may hear people talk about blast classes and so on. And there is a basis for why a full day session with breaks in the middle and time to go back and review things can help people form those memories better. Classes like every 2 or 3 days might be better, are certainly still better than once a week. But that's not something that generally most of us can do. Generally, we're going to be stuck on the once per week type of session. So what can we do about this? Turns out that the exposure to the information doesn't have to be exactly the same at the level that we're teaching here. That if we show somebody how to dance something and we teach them, and then partway through the week, if they just look at it again, maybe read about it or think about it, bring it back to the forefront of their mind, get it back into that midterm memory, and then it'll help transition from the midterm memory into the long-term memory. a midweek review, a tickler, a reminder, a way for people to actually just even, look at an example, look at the definition, look at something on a website, look at terminations, whatever. That can make a big difference in forming long-term memories, because you do the exposure on the lesson night, you've got a rest, a time in between, you bring it back again into midterm memory after it's gone away from midterm memory, let it come back in, and then go through. That type of thing can make a big difference in memory formation. Now, Don Beck, a couple weeks ago, we were talking, and Don was talking about his teaching technique across 4 weeks, where he would introduce something, teach it one night. The very next week, he would teach it from scratch again, just do it over again. The third week would be sort of a review of what was there. The fourth is another lighter review and more just dancing, and then continuing to use it. Great example of spaced repetitions. And this is exactly why Don's technique was so effective. That it's still weekly repetitions, but it's far better than try and do it and then move on and assume they've got it and carry forward. Now, even within the context of a single evening, you can still use spaced repetitions in here for memory formation. You can teach something, you practice it, make sure they learn it right the first time, get it early on. Do that for a tip, maybe go away, not use it the next tip, but then the tip after that, you can come back to it. Even within the scope of a tip, you can dive into some sequence or something and do it a couple times, and then go away from it. Let them dance, let them clear their minds, and come back to it, and then go away, clear their minds, come back to it. You can do this within a tip, within an evening dancing, and then across the larger scope of multiple days. So this spaced repetition of exposures helps the Krebs. I could even tell you the names of some of the proteins and how they work with the inhibitors and the guys being formatted. No, we don't want to go into all of that, but just realize that the chemical process of forming memories requires these types of repeated exposures with rests in between. All right. So let's move on. We want to keep this presentation part relatively short, so I'll move on and we'll have lots of time to talk about it. Switching back from how memories are formed, now let's look at recall. This is called cognitive science, or the people that study this is cognitive research. There's a leading theory called the dual process theory. That's sort of the dominant theory of things that says basically there's two different processes going on in our brains. That one type of process is a very fast pattern matching reaction type of layer. This layer of your brain gets exposed to something and knows how to react. If you think of the term muscle memory, well, muscle memory isn't in the muscles, it's in this fast pattern matching section of your brain, which is very distinct from the slower language section of your brain, the one that understands, that knows how to listen to language, interpret what these sounds mean, and think about it and reason, what does he really mean when he says that? This type of language and reasoning layer is an entirely different process than the quick pattern matching and response layer. The book Thinking Fast and Slow, written in 2011, sort of popularized this theory a little bit. It's a great book. It's not necessarily scientifically 100%, well, it certainly isn't 100% accurate, because the author sort of anthropomorphizes the processes. He talks about system 1 and system 2 and them talking to one another. Well, they don't. That's not the way it works. But it's a good metaphor, a good analogy for how this works. It's an interesting book. The names System 1 and System 2 are debatable, but that's a common name used for these types of things. There really aren't physical parts of the brain. Everything is scattered around, but it sort of describes the way that our brains work. If you think about driving a car, more precisely think about how we don't think when we drive a car or ride a bicycle or walk along a sidewalk when something's there. We don't have to think about how we pick up our feet and move them. We don't have to think about what it takes to make a right-hand turn versus a left-hand turn. We don't have to think about how hard to press the brake when we slow down at a stoplight. All of this is part of the thinking fast, the System 1 level. You ever go the wrong way out of habit? You know, you pull out somewhere and you turn right when you really meant to turn left. That's System 1 because you've turned right so many times. System 1, you aren't thinking about it, it just reacts. It just does the thing. Have you ever seen a dancer do the same call wrong in a singing call or when you're calling more at speed? Even though when you do it slowly, they get it right. Of course you've seen that. It happens all the time. That's the difference between System 1 and System 2 inside these people's heads. When they do it slowly and they think and they reason through it, they know what the call does. But it's System 1 is the level that we dance at. It's the system, I'm jumping ahead of slide. Yeah, let me jump ahead of slide. System 1 is the dance level. When we dance at speed without thinking, we're using System 1. We hear a call and we react. We don't think about it. We just do it. If we have to think about it, then we're using System 2, which is far, far slower, like 10 times as slow. What was that call? Oh, he said this. How do I do that again? Oh, yeah, that means I have to do this, and then I have to do that, and then what is it? Yeah, we do this other thing again. We don't dance by reasoning out what the calls are. We might be able to do that slowly and feel like we're dancing when we're learning, but the dance at speed, the pleasurable part, is all System 1 reacting. Where System 2, on the other hand, is the language and cognition. It's the part where System 1 can come across an unrecognized pattern. Oh, here's a call. Wait, I'm not sure how to do that. Or I'm in an unfamiliar formation. Oh, I'm half sashayed. How do I do that? Then System 2 can jump in and say, this is what you need to do. So you might see people pause, they freeze for a moment, eyes kind of go blank. Oh yeah, then they remember and they go on. That's the System 1 and System 2 interacting with each other. When we talk, when we teach, we are speaking to System 2. That's the only way humans really communicate with one another, you know, unless you look at infants and the skin to skin and some of the low-level comfort things. As we generally teach, we're teaching System 2. We don't get a chance to talk to System 1 because System 1 doesn't do language. System 1 doesn't know words. All it knows is pattern, response. See this, respond. That's what System 1 does. So how does System 1 ever learn anything? Practice, practice, practice. The only way System 1 learns something is be exposed, do it. Be exposed, do it. Be exposed, do it. Over and over and over again until it becomes rote, until it becomes that muscle memory that we talk about. Think of military training where you're taking the privates and you're breaking them down so that they don't think, and then you teach them how to respond, and you do it over and over again, and you do it when they're tired and sleepy, and you do it when they're, and then you take them away, and then you come back and you do it again. Yes, that's the way that you teach System 1 how to react. So for us teaching dancing, what do we have to do? How do we move our stuff from system 2 to system 1? What we need to do, get system 2 to do it correctly, and then do it over and over and over again with the spaced repetition, and do it faster and faster, taking away the ability for system 2 to do the action, forcing the dancers to simply react by system 1. You take away their time to think, slowly, gradually, as you're repeating it over and over again. That's the way that system 1 learns. Now, system 1 can't learn definitions of a call. If you talk about spin the top, the center and adjacent ends turns half, and then the new centers go 3/4, while the others do a quarter promenade around that center point, to finish in a wave of 4. System 1 can't learn that, but what it can learn is a whole bunch of patterns, a huge number of patterns and responses, different arrangements. When they become comfortable with, that's because you've done it 100 times, a half sashayed, and you've done it 100 times, boy, boy, girl, girl, and you've done it 100 times, girl, girl, boy, boy. System 1 can learn smaller pieces, like the cross-fold action of a recycle. It can learn that smaller piece and then be able to apply that as sort of a chunk. That's the way you learn the more complex calls. But it's all through repetition and practicing those small points. So we teach by explaining the system 2, practice slowly and correctly, then faster and faster, forcing system 1 to come into play. If you want them to learn it, if you want system 1 to learn it right, you have to get them to do it right every time. You can't come back and fix it later, because getting system 1 to unlearn a pattern is very hard. It's very good at remembering that. Getting it to unlearn and replace one pattern with another is actually surprisingly difficult. So making it better the first time is okay. If you want to overlay an older pattern with a newer one, you have to make the pattern different. If somebody doesn't do grand square correctly, come back and teach them grand square where they have to clap at the corners to get the timing right, because that clapping makes it different. Or give them a mnemonics or some sort of little tag to say every time they do that, and make them say it every time so that you're impressing this different pattern. Do it and say this to do it. Those are ways you can overwrite the system 1 stuff. Use the spaced repetition technique. Teach something, go away, dance for a bit, clear the mind, come back, go away, come back, space it out over time, check, and recognize that our techniques are about the worst possible way for people to form long-term memories about how we work. Weekly lessons are it's hard. That's part of why we struggle getting people to learn. But if you can get a review midweek, if you can understand that there's a biochemical difference between people that changes the way that their memories form, if you can take advantage of that, if you can work on, understand you're teaching the system 2, but getting them to practice to learn by system 1, you're able to actually build dancers that can dance. Your job as a teacher is to get these people able to dance to other callers and enjoy it. To enjoy dancing to other callers. That's our role as teachers. And so that means training system 1 how to react in all the ways that the other callers are going to expect people to do it. So that's the end of the slideshow. It did take a bit longer than I wanted. We'll stop the screen share here. Who's got the first question? Let's talk.
Well, Barry, I thought your presentation works out real well. You're talking about teaching students how to dance, but it's directly related to how a caller learns to call. I mean, my problem is I've got a fair amount of it down in system 2, but I haven't got my system 1 in gear so I can be spontaneous while I'm on the stage calling from one call to the next. That's where I see my problem is the spontaneity I need to be a caller.
Absolutely. And now that's one case where modules can help. Because System 1 can learn patterns of surprising complexity. It's not just, oh, the stove is hot, pull your finger away. You can build very complex behaviors into there, by building on things. And so as you learn, as you can impress functional pieces, we'll use the word modules, as you can impress those functional pieces into your System 1, then you can call those pieces up and launch into the process. Right and left through, veer left, Ferris wheel, centers pass through, right? That's a 0 that you can just rattle off without thinking about it, leaving your System 2 free to be looking at, okay, who have I gotten people, what am I going to do next? So, modular calling is one way to get your System 1 doing it. How do you get things into your System 1? Do it over and over and over and over again. Practice, practice, practice. Even if it's by yourself in a closed room, you can help train your System 1.
Ooh, we got that one. Okay.
I would like to comment that, thank you, Barry. Very informative, you have a knack for taking stuff very technical and breaking it down to very practical so people will understand. I gave as you mentioned, a talk several weeks ago on teaching so people will learn. Now I better understand some of the principles that I said. I just know to do them by System 1. But
you found that they work.
Yeah.
But now we can understand why they work.
Yes. And Barry Clasper, several weeks ago in the COVID class, was doing a talk and was talking about System 1 and System 2. And I didn't fully understand it then, and I have better understanding now. I have several other, and John, I think it was John, who said this is something that applies to learning to call as well as learning to dance. And I've been in teaching mental image classes, I've been trying to do some of that, but I haven't been working at it enough. So I will try to do more of that. Janet mentioned in those classes that she does homework, and I guess this is a good reason for homework on anything. As much as people hate it, it gives you a chance to take a break and then go have to think about it again a day or two later.
The important thing there is that we don't go directly from short-term memory, which is, like 15, 20 minutes-ish. We don't go directly from short-term, by the way, and there's a working term memory that's even shorter, that's just a few seconds. And as we're dancing and we hear callers stack calls, call 2 or 3 things ahead, and you can only remember a few of those. That's the working memory. That's very short. Short-term memory, like 15 minutes. We have to get stuff out of short-term memory into the mid-term memory that's more like a day before it goes into long-term memory. And so the homework gives us a chance to put that back out of short-term memory into mid-term memory again to refresh that, to help the longer-term memory formation.
Hey Barry, did your cousin ever look at the fruit flies and decide whether the fruit flies had an interest in learning or not? I mean, some dancers, well, that has to do something. I mean, you have all these systems and stuff, but you also have to have the rest of the brain engaged that wants to learn. Do the fruit flies want to learn something?
His very first research was, I'll brag on my cousin a little bit, sort of a groundbreaking bit of research that was later confirmed and became a common technique. He would expose fruit flies first to a bad odor and then give them a tiny shock. And they and the nose of the fruit fly would curl up when they expected the shock to come. And so by detecting whether the nose curled or not, you could tell if they remembered that bad odor meant shock is coming. And that was their first thing. He also trained them on mazes and other things like that, and so on. But yeah, it was interesting. But then they did take their research and move it to much higher level animals as well, finding sort of the same results. With people, they didn't do the bad smell and shock technique. They did other things.
Research went a lot further than that. They actually went into the fruit flies to creating the dysphorus, which is creating essentially photographic memory in specific dimes of it. There's a great research paper that was done on synapses and the neural substrates of memory that I think Tim was also involved in. He's done a lot of those, which he's done neuroscience and whatnot. Barry, I want to say that was probably one of the best, and I reiterate what Don says, explanations of breaking down system 1, system 2, cognitive and long-term memory processes in simple terms that I've heard in a long time. Where the hell were you when I was learning this in after school?
A lot of this was inspired by a presentation Barry Clasper did at Color Lab several years ago. Barry couldn't make it to this presentation today, but we talked, and I told him how his work inspired this and some additional learning. But then you look at observations and you see how it works with real people in real life as you work with people. It explains many of the behaviors and actions that you see. And if you understand the mechanisms that are going on and that they are mechanisms, well, then that helps you better. One, it helps you become more patient. You understand that, it's not a question of will or doubt or can they hear, but it also helps you find ways to exploit the mechanisms and improve what you do.
Barry, I have a question about one of the things you said. You made pretty clear that you don't want to do it over and over and over again. You want to do it over and then take a break and over again and take a break. Now, you were mentioning teaching a new call in an evening. And are you saying that if I use it first tip, second tip, and third tip, it's not as good as if I use it first tip and third tip and give them?
Well, the concept here is that to get long-term memory formed, you need the spacing, you need the repetition with gaps, with pauses, rests in between. That's the way you form the long-term memory. But the way that we get there, we need to first get it working in our working memory, the very short few second type of thing. We need to make sure they understand it in their short-term memory, through the course of a tip. Yes, I have this down. We need to get it into their midterm memory that's going to last, the rest of the day or the rest of the night. So doing something over and over again in one tip is great to get it into short-term memory. Doing it again 2 tips later refreshes. It's another exposure to the midterm memory that you need. And then, subsequent exposures over time help form the long-term memory. So I'm sort of a fan of the expanding rest periods where I teach it a lot and get it working right, get it working well within the scope of a tip. I'll go away for a little bit, then come back to it when it's working well, make sure it's still working well. Come back and do a little bit of it, maybe the next tip, depending on how well it's working. The next tip, I might not review it, but I'll just do it, double check, have they still got it, re-expose it in longer term memory, that third tip, but not beat it to death that third time. And then the next week, much like you, realizing that probably didn't get into long-term memory, do a more serious reteach, continue and expose, but then like your technique, the third time now, The third week, we're able to not so much review it, try it, see how it works, and so on. So I wind up teaching very much the way you do. Don.
One of my first questions for you near the beginning of your talk, and then you proceeded to answer it over and over again, so I shouldn't even ask it, but was when you say, take a break and then reteach it, I wanted to know what the gap was. And you're saying 1 or 2 days would be good. I was wondering whether the 1 week I'm stuck with could be good. But you mentioned how to plan that and how to work with it, which again answered that question. The other thing that I had stressed that you're reinforced beautifully was one of the things I said was do everything in your power to do it right the first time, and then don't let them do it wrong, like reteaching so they don't accidentally do it wrong or what have you. As you mentioned, if they do it wrong, that's one of the two things they've got to choose between that and the right thing.
We can fix it in system 2 relatively easily. We just go back and re-explain it and so on, and that's easy. Fixing it in system 1 is much harder if they've got the, do the thing, respond, and the response is wrong. You have to overlay that response with a different one. And that's difficult because when you do it at speed, they're not learning the new one. Instead, they're responding with the old one. You have to almost break it down, come at it from a completely different direction, almost as if it's a different call in order to impress the new way of doing it. It's the concept of unlearning something is surprisingly difficult. And particularly when it gets into system 1.
It is. It's one of the biggest shames that we have. I love the fact that you you use the reference of recycle. Putting learning ends across Walter repetitive mote is a form of system 1 learning, which can be reinforced and then taken into system 2 much easier than the way it's usually done. Girls turn back, wheel and deal. You learn it, then you have to unlearn it, then you have to relearn it, then you have to learn it from a different system, then you have to unlearn it and relearn it, which is what we have done over and over and over with square dancing as callers to force system 1 learning in and force system 1 unlearning in a process and try and squeeze that in to get people dancing a complex series of systems. We rush them through and then hope that once by the time they get to plus or advanced, we can start transferring, a year, 2 years, whatever of bad training into system 1 learning it properly the first time. It just doesn't work that way.
The Barry Clasper talk at Caller Lab I mentioned some time ago was actually deliberately had a somewhat misleading title. He was talking about dancing by definition. All right. Well, okay, we're going to go in, we're going to learn about how you teach people what all the words are and the vocabulary and things. His point through the talk was no. Everybody always dances by definition all the time, every movement they do, no matter what you do. The problem is their definition may not match yours. Their definition is how they've learned to respond and react to that call, the sort of system 1 patternish response. That's their internal definition of the call. Whether it matches what you wanted it to be or not is a different question. So, focusing on how to teach that system 1 the proper definition and response is our toughest challenge as a square dance teacher.
Hey Barry, I'd like to ask a question to follow up on that one I asked a minute ago. A great companion to this topic would be, how do you cajole the uninterested partner that comes to square dance with his girlfriend or his wife or the whoever the person that gets drawn to the square dance? How do you cause them interest so they want to be taught? I mean, you could teach somebody who's interested in teaching, but if they don't have a desire to be taught, system 1 and system 2 won't mean a thing until you get their mind on the right thing. So a great companion to this would be to have, tips and something to tell to try to interest the people that are not really interested in being there to learn?
My guess, I'll take a swing at an answer, and certainly I suspect, we have others on the call that probably can give a much better answer than I. But my guess is that the people that don't want to do it are coming in with a preconceived notion of what they're going to see, and we can help change. We can help raise their interest by delivering something that is not the preconceived notion. We can do that through music that is unexpected. We can do that through providing the good feeling of success very quickly. Oh, look, you did that. Hey, great. We can celebrate with that success. We can help them. We can keep them moving very quickly, not talking, get them responding. Usually, in my experience, that seems to work to help bring out some of the recalcitrant ones. However, there will be some that are opposed to doing this. I'm only here for you kind of thing. And if you weren't interested in doing this, I wouldn't be here. And oh, by the way, the Green Bay Packers have a game on lesson night, and I think we should cancel lessons for it. No, we're not canceling lessons. If you want to stay home, watch the game, you stay home, watch the game. And if you're just not going to be willing to do it, bye. Any other comments, thoughts on that?
Mine's in a different direction. One of the things I've noticed about several activities that I've gotten relatively good at over the years is that I develop kind of the mental framework to understand and remember something much more quickly. And the particulars I'm thinking of are both square dancing and whitewater. I was a professional whitewater guide back in my 20s. And back when I first started, it was just a big, massive, raging water. And now I look at a stretch of rapids once and I see lines. I remember where all the rocks are. Similarly with, square dancing, of course, it takes me way less time to learn a new call than it did previously. Wonder if you could talk to those mental structures and how we might be able to help dancers build the right kind of structures to learn those things a little bit.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that I think we hit from day one with brand new people is that, well, there's two parts to it. First, as a society, we no longer really take instruction very well. We don't listen verbally with the intent of understanding. Instead, we oftentimes listen for the purpose of responding. All I want to do is hear what you're saying so I can respond to it. Not, I want to listen to what you're saying so I understand it. There's a societal thing that happens in there. And so we have to overcome that. When we teach verbally, we can overcome that through demonstrations, we can overcome that through reading and so on, but we can help, that's a barrier that we see. The second barrier we see is that most of the time, the people that we're getting into our lessons have forgotten how to learn. They've forgotten how to think about something, take it apart, understand where it's going to be and see how to fit it back together with other pieces and do that. And so we have to help people learn to listen. We have to help people learn to learn. And then as you go along, and particularly as we become practice, it's that system one learning larger and larger patterns. We found that learning the challenge 2 level was actually easier than learning the challenge 1 level, because we were back in the learning mode again. And because with challenge 1, we were able to build some larger responses that then challenge 2 could build on, which was a surprise. We found C2 far easier for that kind of purpose, learning how to read the river, learning how to see oh yeah, this type of smooth water over here means that there's a rock right over here. When I see this tumbling over there, I can understand, you understand what's underneath the structure. And so by doing our calls often enough, by thinking about them, we start to see the underlying structure. And I think the dancers do that as well. You don't get that right at the beginning. You can't expect to get that right at the beginning unless you're dealing with truly gifted people.
Right.
It actually makes a lot of sense, and it's pretty self-evident that in looking at the structures of the learning systems that would be what happened. Your system one is your fast, your unconscious. It's basically your base need structures that you're catering to. If you put it into a process, it's like in school, an elementary student learning the math times tables. That's rote learning. That's system that's forced down to you, and then it's learn, regurgitate, and it's learn for the sake of regurgitation only, which is how a lot of square dancing is taught. When you look at system two, it's taking what you've learned, taking that encoding and putting it in the storage, but using it for a dual retrieval purpose. How do I actually apply that to something? And as you said, as learning has developed, it's a lot of the same. We've lost that methodology. Nowadays, if you take a student out and they learn the timetables in schools, by the time they get to grade 2, you ask them what's 2 times 2. I don't know if that's in grade 2 anymore, in grade 10 anymore, but their response is, just a minute, let me get the calculator on my phone, rather than actually put that through the process, because they've never had to put that into the conscious part of effort, complex decision making, because it's already done for them. So it's all system one, encode, storage, retrieval, regurgitate, and I can use the internet or the computer to do anything I need to do after the fact.
Absolutely.
That ties into your challenge theory. When you look at it in that base, everyday decisions is system one, the little short terms, the complex reasoning and logic. It makes perfect sense, and is almost self-evident why challenge one would be more difficult than challenge two, just for that particular reason, because they have to relearn how to think.
Daryl, you've been awfully quiet all day today. Do you have comments?
I know. I'm just, I'm very impressed with what you presented. No doubt about that. I've been kind of sitting here wondering, most of what you're doing is directed towards teaching the dancers. I know that's what your presentation was for. I kind of wonder from the caller aspect, you did bring up the importance of the modules. I like that. But there's sort of a relative memory involved in that, isn't it? When you start talking about modules, how many square through modules do you have? How many right and left throughs? How many zeros? There's a certain relationship between those things from the start to the finish. And how does this all fit into the system one and system two particularly?
That's a really neat question. So there's a couple of things that happen. First, the system one can manage an incredible number of patterns of increasing layered complexity. It's amazing how much we learn. And when you start looking at, just as you go through the day, realize how much you do sort of unconsciously that's all running out of that system one. Autonomously, you're not thinking about it. The number of modules that you can learn in there is pretty high. Some people are better than others. Jerry Story must have 1,000 modules that he remembers, or 1,000 get outs, and he's able to pull that stuff out. Oh my God. But some of the rest of us may only have 100 or more than some number like that. But when we can get a module down into system one where we can recite it without too much conscious thinking, what that's going to do is let our system two run free. We've disconnected our voice from system two, really, that we're just rolling out this module. And we're thinking ahead with system two, where that's going to land and what our next thing is. We can tee up the next piece that we want to use. And then we launch into that sequence, and we know where that's going to end. And so we can tee up the next thing, and we can be thinking about what we're going to do for our get out, or aligning ourselves for the get out to pull the trigger on that. So the important thing, it goes back to what John Jerkins was saying earlier, that to be effective as a caller using these systems, we have to get sort of the module and the sequences so that we can roll them out of system one relatively easily, so that we can stitch them together in our head with system two, freeing the brain cells up for more complex things as we're talking. You know, so as we're calling, we can be watching the square and say, "Oh, Sally over there has a problem," or we can be watching the square and getting ready for this wonderful get out, or we see this square break down, and we're still calling and we're still talking. So you know, that's an amazing skill.
Yes, I agree with all of that. But at what point now? Of course, most of the newer callers, they say, I have a terrible memory. I have trouble memorizing things. At what point do these modules, broken down into the individual pieces, become a composite unit rather than lyrics? You understand what I'm saying? You're memorizing words that that'd be sort of like memorizing sounds, I suppose, to fit letters. Is there a process that you can go through to shorten that, to make it easier? Because I think that's probably the hardest thing for the new caller right there.
I think I agree with you quite a bit, and I don't know of a better way other than practice, and maybe that's practice by yourself behind a microphone. I'd certainly love to hear other ideas or approaches.
I was trying, you know, at some point I realized I don't memorize modules well, and I don't have a lot memorized. And so I was reading about memory and spaced repetition and started using a flashcard program that does, you know, there are a number of them that will automatically do the spaced repetition. The problem that I had, I think, is going to what Daryl was talking about, is how do I tag a module to put on one side of the flashcard that would then key up the contents of the module for me to try and remember it. So you're looking at flashcards and, you know, it's like, how do I name the module? Do I somehow come up with a 2-word description of the module? Something that keys it in my brain so that then when I'm reciting it, to turn it over for the flashcard to see if I've got it, and doing the repetition, you know, 10 minutes or an hour or 24 hours later, that key will cue up the module in my brain. I think, and that was the problem that I was having. It's like, I can go about memorizing things, like you can memorize poetry and you have the title of the poem to key it in your brain, to bring up the memory. So I'd be interested in hearing people's thoughts on that.
Well, Kris, this is Terry. One of the things I do, like when I'm writing some of the modules, like if I want to transfer the column get out module, then that's how I tag the module, is it's a transfer the column get out module. And then I memorize that. Yeah.
If you have multiple transfer the column get outs, or one from a corner box and one from a partner line.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I did that. I used the key move to label them.
I've got a giant stack of 4x6 cards that I use. You know, I may remember this, but I'll use it as the trigger to my memory. Oh, I see that card. Oh, that's that one again. Yes, I'll remember to use that one. Of course, by the time I get towards the end of the sequence, I've forgotten which one, so I've got to glance down. Oh yeah, this one.
Kris, I know that historically, I gather that's when callers didn't site call or even module call, but just had different sequences, they would name them so they could remember them. I think that's where Chicken Plucker, the name, came from, is somebody thought of this great pattern and then decided to give it a name so they would remember it. Now, your question, I gather, is when I look at the term Chicken Plucker, how do I know that that's the call it was? But I think
no, my question is, no, Chicken Plucker I can remember because it's got a name. And when I hear Chicken Plucker, that triggers that whole sequence. But, you know, say get out is swing through, turn through, Alamand left. You know, well, I've got that in my head, obviously. But, you know, if I were trying to memorize that,
well, one of the things I used to use to memorize things that hear nice get out let's say swing through, turn through, Allen man left, I first realized that that was something going on and could be used over again because I was at Billy's dance, and I would write it down as Billy's get out, and that would help me, you know, Sam's equivalent here, or that kind of thing, and I'd name them frequently by triggering who I heard it from.
One of the,
Yeah.
one of the reasons that would work so well is the cognitive association with both the visual, the verbal, the acoustic, and the tactile association, which are your 4 key primaries that you're pulling down to associate that one thing with. By putting those 4 interrelations onto one object, such as Billy's get out, you've hit all the markers in your brain to react to that one thing, and it will always probably stick with you like that, just like the chicken plucker does the first time the light popped on exactly what it was. What Daryl was asking about in the modules, I'm just thinking back to what you've been putting on your series of that one particular flow module with the turn through cloverleaf, square through, et cetera, that you've been using on the page. And that's the process of the testing, which is the recall and use of this in one context. Then you've got the spacing, which is what Barry was talking about, which is repeating that and recalling it over bits and pieces of time. But you're using that same, your focus is there, but you're using it in different contexts to reinforce that focus. And then you've got the interleaving, which is putting all these skills together, as what Daryl's saying. Where these modules gel is once you start doing that, you're focused on one module, and then you're starting to associate it to different things. So that's why we get the partner line modules, the corner blocks modules, and everything. It's because we've interleaved them, we've associated them to where they will fit into that relationship, and then you add them one at a time. And it's a repetitive process that goes between what Barry was saying, system 1 and system 2. But where that switch is, I think is going to be very different for everybody.
Barry, could I get you to comment on visualization and where that fits into the system 1, system 2? Because I think as a caller, I think I respond to the pattern on the floor about what I'll call next. And so for me, that's the trigger of maybe what I'll call rather than, so, but how does visualization play a part between those 2 systems?
Well, back to system 1 with the notion of seeing a pattern and responding. We can see that, I mean, that pattern, the trigger for a system 1 action can be many different kinds of senses. It could be a taste, it could be, you taste something and remember, or whatever. It might be a sound you hear, or in the case of watching dancers on a dance floor, you see a pattern. And in order to see that pattern, you've abstracted it to the point of knowing, if I have these dancers over here, and those dancers over there, regardless of what they're wearing or who they are, you've abstracted it to be able to see, whether it's primary and secondary or partners and corners or whatever. You found that pattern, and now you trigger it. Absolutely. So the visual aspect of it is just as strong as any other aspect.
Absolutely. Kris brought up a very interesting module there with the swing through, turn through to the Allemande left. There's 2 different ways that we approach that one. One is to do it intentionally. The other way is to see what we have out there and take advantage of it. The setup for it, of course, is out of sequence waves, partner waves. Everybody has their partner alongside of them in the grid. And if you're out of sequence anywhere in that grid, you can do this swing through, turn through to an Allemande left. With that, if everybody's got their partners in the grid. Is that confusing? I think I just confused myself. No, but the point was you either set it up or you see it, but it's still a visual memory as much or more than anything else.
And being able to see those patterns when they come and take advantage of them when they're handed to you, that's wonderful. That's truly good.
Yeah, it took me forever.
I think
Go ahead,
probably
Kris.
my issue was trying to do it in a batch, you know, so that I hear what you're saying is sort of work on one thing at a time. And I was trying to take, okay, here are 10 plus modules that I want to, or 10 plus get outs that I want to memorize, and throwing them into a stack of flashcards, basically, although on the computer, and trying to do that. And I think that maybe that's just the wrong approach.
It's
for this
the
kind of
wrong
thing.
approach for the beginning.
Yes.
You could, if you work on one at a time and you get that down, then your later repeated exposures, that's when you do the flashcard and mix it up and recall and so on. At the beginning to learn them, that's the wrong answer, but use it later because it's a very valuable technique for getting the repeated exposures to get it back into midterm memory, to get it back into the long-term memory.
Barry, Kris did say that she's using a flashcard program or a few that do give the space and then, don't fire it all at you, but go through it, then leave a space for learning and then bring it back and what have you. So some of what you're asking her to do, her software apparently is doing for her already. Am I right with that, Kris? You're muted.
Yeah, I was using Anki, or Anki, which is not free, but available free on the computer, and the only one they really charge for is if you use it on iOS, because they figure Apple users have money. Yeah, it's designed specifically for spaced repetition. That's the whole raison d'etre of the application, is to do memorization using spaced repetition. So you can create your own flashcards. There are decks for various things. It would probably be something useful for challenge dancers trying to memorize a level, if they're really trying to memorize the definitions of a level.
Kris, would there be an opportunity, instead of it just being textual, if there were like a graphic associated with it, like almost like a flow of some of the calls in it, so you'd see that image and that would recall the whole module?
Yeah, I think that you can put a graphic in it. I've mostly seen it as a graphic for the answer as opposed to the cue, but I suppose one could do it as a cue also. Yeah, I don't know. I could take a look at that.
Well, one thing I've learned from this is that I know what our next week's program is. Barry's going to repeat this for us, and I was going to say with his permission, and your homework between now and then is to listen to the video that Dan's going to post on Tuesday. I'm wondering, Barry, is there a way to restructure this for caller learning instead of, caller teaching instead of just dancer teaching? I mean, most of it's pretty parallel. We're now doing the caller part of it, but it's kind of an interesting thought. And Daryl brought up the good thing of a lot of us are involved in caller training. How do we cover that?
Well, and to hit on that, the one thing that was said earlier that really struck me is Barry said that everybody dances by definition. It's just not the same definition as to what you have. So if you take this to the caller aspect, I would like you to go and hit upon how do we get the correct definition across in the first place so that they are on the same page as we are with that definition thing. Did that make sense?
Well, it does. I mean, if we're talking about how to explain calls as a technique, the problem is establishing a common vocabulary so that people can understand the meaning you intend behind the words that you say. If they have different meanings assigned to the same words, you're not going to get the message across. And so the part of the early weeks in learning, in teaching raw beginners, is establishing that vocabulary and that way of explaining it.
Okay, so is there anything listed anywhere that has specific, like I noticed one thing is in, a direction of in. What is in? So is there a terminology out there as to a page that says, oh, I can get these are the things I need to stress to them?
Not till you get to advanced, because it's hard to, because there's two different ends.
Well, hey, Janet, one of the things I found when I was trying to teach tag the line and people had to face into the center of the line, they didn't know where the center was, but they knew where the other end of the line was. And so I changed from saying face into the center to look at the other end, and then you do your tag. And it made all the difference in how quickly they were able to grasp that concept.
Or look in the direction of more people, not fewer people.
Right.
Decide when more people go that way.
Yeah.
Terry, I was talking in one of my other groups that I teach it that way also. Face the far end of your line. It's much easier.
Made all the difference. Yeah.
So, you know, Janet, going back to your point, one of the things that the definitions committee has tried to do, but definition, well, I believe you had, I think you had Clark Baker here doing one of these sessions some time ago, but one of the troubles with the definitions committee is different masters. Do we write the definitions to be used as teaching documents for new dancers or people learning the calls? Do we write them as reference documents for experienced callers and looking how to use it? Do we write different books for different audiences? And the answer was no, we don't want different books. It has to be one book. Well, you know, so we've struggled in writing the definitions, getting the proper balance of using the same terminology everywhere to mean the same thing and trying to make that consistent across all of the definitions. But that means the definitions are in a language, a square dance definition language. And the square dance definition language doesn't necessarily match up with common English expectations for the same words. And so if we use the square dance definition language as it is in the definitions, we're not going to get the message across to our newer dancers. You can use those definitions for more experienced dancers that have learned to deal with the language, but for new people, we have to try and use colloquial languages, whatever is, you know, the natural languages, to get them to see what we're doing. When I first started teaching, my belief was that I needed to teach the definitions of every call. Here's a call, here's a definition. Let me show you how to do that. When learning about this system 1, system 2, with the way that people react, and realizing that we have to teach system 1, who does not know language, I changed my mind. I don't teach it that way anymore. I'm not trying to teach dancers, new dancers, to be able to recite the definition and then execute it. Instead, I teach them how to react to the words by doing the proper motions. And that's made my dancers coming out of the classes able to dance comfortably to other people. So trying to answer the question of is there a specific vocabulary we can use to succinctly describe what we're doing? Yes, there is, but it's not one that normal mortals can understand.
Going back or a little further on this, if you want more information on the definitions, go back and watch the Zoom session that we had Clark Baker do on the definitions of the reasoning, the thinking behind them, the compromises that had to be made, etc. I believe, yeah, you recorded that, didn't you, Dan? I believe it's up there. That might fill in some of that, but Barry pretty quickly summed it up right there. Barry, one thing that you said, I guess the first thing I want to do is we're well over our hour. I think it's been great. I want to make it officially ended and give people an excuse that they can leave if they want, and then we can continue on where the best part usually shows up afterwards. But Barry, really, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it was informative to everybody that's still here, which is everybody. Dan, as usual, thanks for the engineering behind this. And most of all, thanks to all of you for showing up. I think we had a good session. And with that, you
Really
don't have
appreciate it. It's an interesting topic, and when you start thinking about it yourself and seeing it in real life, it may change the way that you perceive what's going on about you, particularly in learning environments. So thank you all for coming. I sure appreciate it.
there. Now you don't have to feel guilty if you have to leave. Oh yes, let's make this formal. So moving on to others, to another comment. That you mentioned that Barry Clasper gave a talk at Color Lab and intentionally gave the wrong description so that people would show up to listen. I gave the wrong description to this one because I hadn't had a chance to hear it yet. So I didn't exactly know what was coming. I'm glad you added the thing, but I'm glad I got enough of a misdescription so people showed up. There was some overlap.
If we'd said we're going to talk about biochemical processes for long-term memory formation, yeah, nobody would come. Daryl, you've been mentioning a couple points.
I always feel like I have to raise my hand. It's something I remember from grammar school. Gotta say.
System 1.
Well, practically everything. I'm not real bright on this stuff. But as far as the way that I use my memory, it's still visualization. Now, if I were going to say, okay, I want everybody to think about who they'd be facing if they face the other end of the line for a tag the line, first thing is visualization. Dancers, when they dance chicken plucker, dance the heads through chicken plucker 3 or 4 times and then say, okay, do it again. Repetition is a thing, but they'll know where they've been because they recognize it up here as traffic. And to me, the relativity of everything we do in square dancing, calling, and you'll hear me say it over and over again, is you like chicken plucker, I like basic traffic pattern. Because absolutely every place you go is right in there. And everything you do is relative to that and how you get there and how you get away from it. End result being Alman left, everything is relative to that. But those are all visualizations. If you're going to use cue cards of any kind, that's reading. That turns it into lyrics. And until you read it and turn it into some sort of mental visualization, it's not going to be remembered unless it's a poem, like Kris said, which is done in rhythm, which is done in rhyme. There are little things alongside of lyrics that help you remember. But as far as moving dancers, I still go back to visualization as far as being a caller.
You can't take that chunk of whatever it is and make good use of it until you truly understand what it does and how it works and what can connect with it. Yes, absolutely. And that, I think, is the key difference between seeing the choreographic pieces as tools versus, as you say, versus just using it as words of a poem, as words of a song. Yeah, absolutely.
Basic difference of knowing that's a hammer and knowing how to use that hammer.
Barry, I thought of a system 1 thing that I used a lot, and I imagine everybody does, on singing calls. Once we've learned them, I can't remember what I'm about to say until I hear the music. The music triggers my reaction to coming up with the correct words and choreography that fit, etc.
Have you ever had to, you're putting on a singing call, you've got to play it a little bit at the beginning to remind yourself what it is, then you start over and you can swing into it? Yep, yep. Another example of a system 1 piece that happens with callers is, what do you say, what do you chant as they're promenading home? If you have a regular chant that you use, it's interesting if you hear recordings of callers, how many times a given caller will say exactly the same thing as they're promenading over and over and over again. And if you only saw the words of the chant, you could look at it and say, oh, that must have been called by so-and-so. Yep, because you got them promenading and you're rattling this off as they're getting home, because you are mentally preparing for the next sequence to launch them. And so you've just got this stuff that's flowing out of your mouth without any conscious thought behind it. And it's an example of another system one thing that happens all the time.
One of my mentors used to say, think clean thoughts, because what you're thinking in the background, unfortunately or fortunately, will come through. And I heard him calling a dance once at a club that was a little intimidating, and I could tell he was thinking bad thoughts at the time. He was thinking, I can make you dance, you're gonna enjoy my kind of dance anyway. But yeah, it shows through. So while you're chanting that promenade home stuff and thinking of the next sequence, at least think clean thoughts about it.
I'd just like to say, Barry, when you talked about the definitions, the language, I think, was it Janet or Terry was asking about the standardization of language and the standardization of the definitions. Again, you very succinctly put what is two lengthy parts of the Caller Lab explanation of how the definitions are to be used for both callers and dancers, in both the approach and the standardization in the actual definitions. That's all in the parts of the definitions that nobody ever reads. They go right to the technical terms or the dance floor or the pattern, but nobody actually reads anymore what this is about. And that goes right back to what you were saying, where feed fast, regurgitate quickly, or the bulimia method of square dance learning, as opposed to actually sitting back and enjoying a meal, putting our hand in the front of our belly and going, oh my God, that was good. I'm fat, I'm stuffed, and I just love it. And that's the big change that we've got in calling. I love the way that Daryl has made that approach to associating modules. And it's the same thing when you're talking about your cue cards. The difference between learning 10 modules at Plus is very different than learning 10 modules at Plus that all have the same movement or the same theme or the same pattern focused through them. That's the guide. Reading as opposed to having a quick glance at a card and thing triggers that memory, or listening to music triggers that memory and switches it from 1 into 2. Excellent presentation. I loved it. Very, very nice.
Kris, for example, has the skill of reading some difficult choreography while being able to watch the dance floor all the time and spot things going on. It's an amazing skill that some people have developed over time. And Kris, in particular, I appreciate the times that we've danced to you with that. Your ability to, even with relatively fresh choreography, to be able to connect the two. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
No,
Barry, does the at the advanced level and other levels where you start a call but then you alter the ending formation, is that a switch between system 1 and system 2? You're suddenly then on system 2 trying to understand where they want you to stop.
It really is, and it's a distinctive feature of the higher levels that you need to engage system 2 more frequently as you dance than at some of the lower levels. On the other hand, when you get to the highest levels, you are expected to have all of that difficult stuff with all of its variations and all of its alternatives. You're expected to dance all of that at system 1 speed. If anybody has heard of the Stanley Winchester tapes, yeah, Kris is going, Don, okay, yep. Stanley Winchester was a dancer that decided he wanted interesting material for his workshops for the teams he was leading. And so he wrote a series of like 150 singing calls sat in a small room with a cassette tape recorder and recorded himself doing these singing calls using the most complex challenge logic that he could. These are non-trivial. These are surprisingly difficult things, and yet he's calling them as singing calls with the timing exquisite, perfect, okay? You can dance these and they feel like dancing, but the only way you can do it is if you've learned all of those interesting little variations that you were mentioning there, Alan, if you've impressed all of that into your system one and can just react to it. So what we see is that as dancers move up the levels, they spend more time thinking system two. That slows down their dancing. As people watch this, they say, well, it's more stop and go than I like. I like to dance. Well, no, that's just because we don't have the dancers quite up to speed yet. When we get them up to speed, it's very flowing, very nice, wonderful stuff. But it takes there's just a lot more to impress down into the system one level at those higher levels. It can be done. It has been done. It is for the best dancers.
Just as whet your appetite, we will be having in the next, bye guys, we will be having, feel free to leave, we will be having a session in a week or two or three talking about challenge dancing, not to make you challenge the callers, but just to give you a feel for what's the difference between challenge dancing and callers who happen to use challenge calls, challenge calling.
That's an interesting difference, yes.
You know the guys. I was one of those people that just used challenge calls, but at least I knew the difference and appreciated the other. Anyway, just to whet your appetite.
Very good. Well, my wife wants me to go. We have to go visit some friends in Milwaukee, an hour and a half away. So thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been good to see you. Thanks, Dan and Don, for organizing this, keeping it going. It's a terrific opportunity. It's only sad that we had to have this virus thing prompt us to be able to get it going in the first place. Thank you all.
Thanks for sharing your knowledge. It was and translating it for us. It was great.
And I will take a risk because the best conversations always happen after we stop the recording, and stop the recording now.